I was saying we missed some opportunities in the economy episode though, because we didn't talk about how Final Fantasy VIII sucks. In that it's an RPG where leveling up is a bad idea, and that's like an interesting take on an economy, but also a really shitty take. Mal's weapon, his kind of standard pistol, very unique style. It's pretty iconic from that series, and it's not something I've seen anywhere else. But they never actually get into like why he has this kind of unique looking pistol. Probably because it was only one season, and they never had the opportunity to get
season
into it.
2. It will all be revealed.
Yeah.
Oh well, damn, that's such a good series. I tell people so much about those, like, 'cause my wife tried to get me to watch that when it first came out, and I was like, and it took me a little bit, but I was like, man, what have I missed? Great series.
It really is a wonderful series.
So we're off rail, but we'll get back on it. So
I was actually going to mention that as the other example, but if we're staying away from it,
yeah,
just say the name for everyone. Just say the name.
I actually don't remember the name of the sword.
We can cut that bit.
Before we begin, the Gamer's Advocate would like to remind you that any episode could contain game spoilers, so watch or listen with discretion. And now your hosts, AMKomnenos, Banana, and Legion. Enjoy the show.
well, welcome to another one of our episodes of the Gamer's Advocate. How you guys doing? You doing pretty good today? Mind blown.
Yeah, for anyone who is just watching this, they won't be aware of exactly how every episode of this always begins. Banana's just describing their lunch, and then mid-sentence, Legion jumps in. Welcome to another episode.
Yeah.
Every time.
Yeah. Well, we need to get the candid impressions for everybody. Of course, this is 100% live, so.
I really thought you were going to say, we need to find new and exciting ways to get Banana to shut his mouth.
And every episode begins with myself and Banana making various faces of...
Now?
We haven't even finalized what we're going to talk about.
Yeah.
Anyway, welcome to another episode of the Gamer's Advocate podcast. How was that?
Very good. Very good.
Welcome to
my own
another
intro.
episode. Today's topic is topics for new episodes.
We've run out.
We're so
it's
tired.
Pat dry. So very tired. Well, actually, we kind of came up with this on the fly, but weapons in game, and I don't mean like glorify weapons necessarily. I was just thinking in terms of what's our favorite weapons that we may have had, or an iconic weapon that we used, and they don't necessarily have to be even a good weapon. It's just something that maybe we liked to play with, and one that we kind of, when you think about the game, we thinking like, I need that, or I want that, in my arsenal, even if I don't really use it that much.
Yes, for me, it's the most iconic weapon in gaming for me, and I think Banana knows where I'm going with this.
Yep.
It's
going to be a race to talk about this first, and I was just thinking, like, it's going to be whoever Legion asks.
I was just thinking I need a backup.
This conversation is going to say the exact same thing.
It's going to be stupid if we don't. So the most iconic weapon in gaming for me is the Buster Sword from Final Fantasy VII, which, even if you haven't played Final Fantasy, you have probably seen. The gigantic sword that looks like no one should be able to wield it, which has become associated with multiple characters across multiple games. And yet, I think there's no better symbol of Final Fantasy VII than that. If you look at the original game box art, the box art is of the meteor from the main game story. It's a stylized version of that coming down towards the Earth. You can think of the heroes, so when we advertise the game, we might use Cloud, we might use Sephiroth, who's become one of the most iconic bosses in any video game. But I think the one symbol that really just sums up Final Fantasy VII is that sword. It is stupid looking, it's ridiculous, but it's perfect. So for me, the most iconic game weapon, the one that I most think about when I think of video game weapons, the one that I want, the one that thankfully the remakes do let you use all the way through if you want to, is the Buster Sword from Final Fantasy VII and associated games.
Yeah, it's what I was going to say with the without the remakes. It's also the weapon that you're most eager to abandon in that game, because it's the weapon Cloud starts with. And despite being, the best weapon available to him at that time, and better than Barrett and Tifa's starting weapon, it sucks compared to the best weapons in the game. Like, it's not something you are going to continue using once a new weapon is available to you. There's really no reason aside from, I really like the way it looks.
It is objectively worse in every possible stat. It's not one of those games where the weapons are trade-offs one against the other. If you think of Dark Souls, where some weapons are better than others, but ultimately, fine, picking whichever one feels good, whichever one you like the feel of. That weapon in Final Fantasy, you have to get rid of. You do not want to use it. But the game insists that you keep it in your inventory at all times. Mm-hmm. So you always have it there. You can see the name every time you open up and go to change weapons. And the character model, when it's in just the world, if he happens to draw his sword, it's still that sword as well. Yep. So you still fully associate it with the aesthetic of Cloud. It's still always that weapon.
What about you, Banana? You got one besides that one?
Well, I'm going to leverage the fact that Khan brought up Dark Souls.
Okay.
So for me, the iconic weapon across the Dark Souls trilogy and the Demon Souls and Elden Ring is the Moonlight Greatsword. And it's a weapon that exists in all of those games, and it's aesthetically pretty similar from game to game. It's also not a weapon I've ever seen anyone use while playing the game. It's just like a fun little Easter egg that it's in the game. I think in Dark Souls 2, it's associated with a character's story, and you have to kind of like progress him through his quest line to get it. And then you get it, and you're like, yay, that goes in my inventory forever. And like, you never use it. But it is a very like iconic weapon. You think of the Moonlight Greatsword and associate it with Souls games. It's interesting that it's a weapon you associate with a game where no one uses that weapon.
Yeah. I think it's an interesting point between the two weapons that we mentioned so far, is they're both very video game feeling weapons. They're both much larger than life. And the Moonlight Greatsword, if I remember correctly, it doesn't look like cold steel. It's got much of a darker look to it. I think it's almost looks like it might be made of iron or something similar. And I seem to think it's got a blue hue to it, but I could be wrong. This might be the memory coloring it.
Yeah, I think if I remember correctly, in DS2, it's kind of like a glowing green. And I think it might be blue in other like kind of incarnations of it, but I definitely remember it being this kind of like very much not a natural resource was used to make this sword. It kind of feels like it's inherently like almost made of magic.
So we can see that within the name, can't we? It's the Moonlight Greatsword. You're going to have that moonlight shining out from within the blade itself. Yeah. So I think we've taken, with our first two choices, it's weapons that are really not of this world. The Buster Sword is inherently impractical. I guess someone's probably made one, but the weight issues must be diabolical with it. And then the Moonlight Greatsword, which doesn't even look like it comes from this world. So we both leaned very much into video game weapons. We didn't just say a claymore. We didn't just say a cutlass or a rapier. We've taken something that's very video gamey.
And I think that's almost the point.
Yeah.
Is that like when you're playing a video game and you're talking about weaponry, like, yeah, sure, the M4 exists in COD and it looks like an M4.
Yeah.
I mean, if it exists in the real world, I'm not going to get excited about it, probably. Like, I think that's just kind of a missed opportunity in a video game. Is if I'm going to play a video game, I'm going to go through this kind of like immersion into a new fantasy. I don't need realistic weapons. Like, embrace the fantasy. Go nuts with it. Tell me my main character is using a sword that most people couldn't pick up with both hands, and he's twirling it around with one hand. Like, yes! I'm fully on board for that.
Yeah. Well, this is not my choice, but it's similar to what you were saying, Banana. The lunar weapons that you can make in Skyrim. One, you have to figure out what all this is. Number 2, you have to find the forge. And number 3, you can't just make it whenever. You can make regular weapons, but to make the lunar weapons, you have to do it under, like, I think the full moon of because there's 2 moons under Skyrim, if I remember right. Don't remember. But yeah, when that one is a full moon, then you can make the weapon, and then it imbues a special attack or a special bonus when the moon is full. But my problem with that one, that sounds great, but give me like extra bonus stats on that weapon, and then it does even more during those situations. But it's not like that. It's just a regular weapon during the daytime or during those non-event periods, which kind of sucks.
Yeah.
You know,
I think that's one of those situations that like Com kind of mentioned where there's trade-offs in certain weapons. And I think those weapons, ones that are like, when this other thing is occurring, this weapon gets more powerful. Overwhelmingly for me in video games, I never use those weapons. Because like I want something that is either always useful or it just sucks and I can ignore it. But like when it's specifically useful, I just kind of check out. I'm like, yeah, but I don't want to think about whether or not those passive buffs are being applied in this moment. I just want to like have my consistency to say that like, yeah, this weapon is awesome or this weapon sucks. I don't want like, sometimes it's awesome. No.
I think this is where hopefully after Legion's had a chance to get their choice out, I think we'll probably get to that point at some point where we talk about weapons that are very useful in specific fights, weapons that have these odd bonuses that rely upon some other feature. I'm thinking of games where when you are below 50% health, your weapon does 1.25% damage, 125% damage, sorry. 1.25, that would be awful.
When you're below 50% health, you're guaranteed to lose.
You must be punished, you must improve.
Yeah.
get good.
Oh yeah, that is the
Further
real
incentive to heal.
Legion, what's your choice?
Oh, do you want earmuffs? Baldur's Gate 2?
Go for it.
You probably already know it anyway. It's the Flail Ages. Man, best weapon in the game. I mean, it doesn't even come close.
Oh, hands down.
It never even
Best weapon
stop.
of the
And it
game.
doesn't even stop. It gets even better as you progress. So
Yeah. In
that's
base game BG2, best weapon of the game. Throw in the DLC or the enhanced edition, best weapon in any Baldur's Gate game. It is absurdly overpowered.
and it is underpowered in BG3.
Yeah. And then,
Stupid.
100 years later, it's not the same weapon. Who would have guessed?
Give me back my flail. I was pissed. I was not as pissed as the whole Vaconia reveal, but I was pissed. I was like,
Yeah.
no, you don't understand. This is the Flail of Ages. It transcends time.
I also love that it's the Flail of Ages, and then 100 years pass, and it sucks. And it's like, the name suggests that time doesn't matter. And it's garbage 100 years later. I don't understand.
So it has abilities, the elemental abilities, fire, ice, acid. So when you're facing a lot of enemies in Baldur's Gate that were problematic before, like trolls, that can be defeated conventionally, and then you have to finish them off with acid or fire. Well, guess what? Whack. They're dead. Whack. They're dead. Whack. It's like on easy mode suddenly. It's like, oh, my life just got a whole lot easier. Plus, you enhance it. So it's just a great weapon to have on somebody like Animan, who Banana hates. But as a cleric, I say
As
it
a
before.
person,
Yeah, as a person.
not as a combatant.
As,
Just hate him as a
a
person.
combatant, he may be the most overpowered companion in the game, but that's just fact. But that being said, I mean, you know, he doesn't have a ton of dexterity, but you don't need it with something like that. As long as he can take a hit and then get that occasional hit in, that elemental thing is going to always proc, even if he misses. So it's a great, when I think of like great game weapons in games, that Flail of Ages for Baldur's Gate, man.
So that's one then we've really found that you've leaned into a weapon you've leaned into sort of its effectiveness, the joy of using it in the game, the joy that it has in terms of the effect that it has on enemies. Like you were saying with the trolls, the ability to take them out despite the fact that they're normally very problematic. Whereas myself and Banana, I think we lent into more just looked cool and a certain level of how iconic the weapon happens to be. Couldn't think of the phrase. So I think we took sort of two different approaches there in how we approach this. Because I think if I was looking for the most effective weapon in the game, a weapon that brings me joy because of the effectiveness that it has, I would have gone somewhere else. And I think I would have gone to Assassin's Creed and the finger blade. And then I'm looking at the sheer killing power that thing has. But then also, it's got a bit of the world attached to it as well. It essentially defines your character and who they are, while simultaneously being murderous.
Well, sure. But the little sprites that you get in Baldur's Gate 2, there's nothing to write home about. So there's not much to get excited about until you find something that's different. So you say that it doesn't look unique, but it actually does look unique in game. Plus, not only that, it's not that you find it. You have to find all the parts to it and then put it together.
Oh, no, I wasn't saying that it doesn't look unique.
Okay.
It's more that what we were looking for lent towards that.
Okay.
We were leaning in towards style.
We were definitely kind of abandoning game mechanics and their association with the weapon in our choices. I think it's funny because if I were to pick a weapon from Final Fantasy VII using kind of the same metrics that led to Legion's choice, I'd end up going with a weapon that I don't remember the look of. And that's the conformer for Yuffie. Couldn't tell you what it looks like.
Gosh,
but it is the most useful weapon in the game because it allows Yuffie to hit for full damage when using the morph attack.
Yes.
And that is what lets you grind out stat boosting items super easily. It's tremendously useful. Couldn't tell you what it looks like.
No.
It's on Yuffie from the moment I have access to it for that exact reason, and I still don't know what it looks like.
I think that's just really interesting because like we've taken those two entirely different approaches as to what we consider to be just our favorite. So I'm wondering perhaps what we could do then is just have a look at what would we pick. In this case, Banana would have gone for Yuffie's Conformer. I would have gone for Assassin's Creed, sort of stabby blade from the thumb. Like, what would you have gone for, Legion, if like we'd have said to you, this is just appearance now? What weapon do you think looks cool? And we're going to throw away all in-game realities in terms of stats and damage. Just what looks cool?
The Lancer from Mass Effect.
Oh, good choice. Gears of War.
No, Mass Effect.
Oh, boo!
The assault rifle.
There are some interesting ones in the assault in Mass Effect.
You could say the Black Widow. I mean, that's
that was going to be one of them.
But you see it in all art from Mass Effect 1, 2, and 3. It's always the Lancer, and it's always the one that they bring back in the Citadel DLC. It says, "Hey, remember Mass Effect 1? That was a great weapon, wasn't it?" Yeah.
It's the sound is very satisfying as well.
That's true of Halo with the assault rifle. That weapon sucks, but it is in every cutscene in Halo.
Yeah.
Like, that's the definitive Master Chief weapon. It's garbage. I'd much rather have the pistol, which is also very iconic as far as Halo goes. But, like, I just remember Master Chief, like, always kind of holding the AR with both hands. And that's the iconic kind of Halo imagery. But we all know it's the pistol.
I am absolutely thrilled by that being Legion's choice, just so that I can say, wow, that's not even my favorite gun called the Lancer. That is incredible.
Yeah. Hey, and I could be mistaken, but Banana, correct me. In Firefly, the TV series, one of the heists that they have, they obtain a Lancer. So I wonder if it's a callback to the games, both Halo and Mass Effect.
Gears of War.
Is it the Lancer or is it the Lassiter? Something like that.
Lassiter, that's right. No, wait a minute. Wait. Because there was the gun that the guy who was over
There's the prototype
prostitutes.
laser gun that the Collector owns.
Yeah, right.
And I think that's the Lassiter.
So which one was the one that he was that the guy who was wanting to have a child, so he got the pregnant?
That's a good question.
Because maybe getting those mixed up.
So that's definitely not the, like, its own thing. It's like the most technologically advanced weapon, and that's why he's bragging.
It's got a laser.
But I can't remember what the name of it.
This is so great. It's a future game, and that the most advanced weapon by far is a laser. It's so cool. I love Firefly, the series.
Yeah.
So good.
That series is awesome. But it's frustrating that I can't remember that detail from how many times I've watched it.
Yeah.
But I know exactly what
I may
you're
edit
talking
this
about.
out because I thought for sure that thing was called the Lancer. But yeah, you're right. Lassiter. Any other weapons you could think of? Because that was my second to piggyback off the first one.
Oh, there are so many. And I think my brain is diving in at this from just all sorts of angles. There's the weapons that I love to use. There's the weapons that I love to look at. There's the weapons that just are kind of badass. There's the weapons that shouldn't work. There's the weapons that the villain gets and I don't, and that really bothers me. There's the weapon that you get at the start of the game that is kind of garbage, but you keep using it because why wouldn't you? This is what the character should have. And I think it's just weapons to me that are iconic. And the one that's also standing out in my mind is a game that I haven't even played all the way through. And it's the crowbar from Half-Life.
Yeah.
And the chainsaw from Doom.
Oh.
Now, that one I have played. And I wonder if there's something in there that these weapons generally... Banana, what was your first choice again? Sorry.
The Moonlight Greatsword.
We've gone with pretty much all melee weapons. There have been some exceptions, especially when we moved on to style, when we said that the Lancer. But generally, we've gone for the weapons that are very up close and personal. We've had the Buster Sword, we've had the Hidden Blade, we've had the Moonlight Greatsword, we've had the Flail of Ages, and now the crowbar. Is there something more inherently fun and cool about using those melee weapons? Is there something about the way that you have to use them very personally? You've got to get up in someone's face and use them as opposed to ducking behind cover?
This is the whole argument in Cyberpunk of like, what's the best weapon? Because a lot of people, you have the melee camp and you have the powers camp. And then of course there's just the regular weapons camp. But it's like a lot of people are in that like sword thing. They love the bat. They love the sword. And so there is something to that because I know there's a large camp that loves that.
I just thought of another one and I'm not sure if we want to use it. It is the...
Oh, I know exactly what you're going to say.
Yeah, I think it's called the Punisher from
Yep.
Saints Row. It is essentially just a giant floppy dildo.
We are using this, and it's for this reason, that you can also get one in Cyberpunk, and you can also get one in Yakuza. The dildo holds a spot of honor in gaming history. How many games can you say you've played with a good crowbar? 1. How many games can you say you've played with a good dildo? 3 right there.
There's nothing more satisfying than knocking somebody out with a vibrator. So
Yeah,
I will say, like, the sound effects from Saints Row 4 that I remember from hitting people with this, the like most weirdly satisfying thud when it made contact.
don't say weirdly. It's just satisfying. They knew what they were doing. They got into your soul.
Well, I'm just saying, like, if you show me that weapon and then bring up the word satisfaction, the sound is not what's going to come to mind.
yeah, when you fire up, what is it called? It's called the Mr. Phallic staff. I think I can't. I'll pull it up. But the one in Cyberpunk, you turns on right away. But then when you put it away or power it down, it goes. There you go. So we're all we can like beat people with this thing. Be like, it vibrates.
It's perfect.
Mm-hmm.
I think I might be wrong now. I think that in Yakuza it's not a dildo. I think it's a Hitachi wand. I think it's a vibrator rather than a dildo.
It's totally different.
Yeah.
Well, anyway.
Not anyway. This is the new topic.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Oh man, I can't wait to see the thumbnail for this episode.
I
just love the idea of like the Buster Sword or the Moonlight Greatsword, and it's clashing with this giant purple dildo.
Man, it's a thumbnail. back to one sub.
Yeah, we just lost our entire audience because we spent this much time talking about this.
Or
Plot twist.
Yeah.
All three of us unsub. That one person who sticks around, they really dig it.
Yeah. So
I'm thinking, and I am gonna change direction here real quick.
Don't.
One of the games that I've thought of that, like, there's not really an iconic weapon. There's just a lot of really cool looking weapons, and it's because all the weapons are fundamentally the same. It's just a cosmetic difference. Sea of Thieves. Sea of Thieves does a ton of like reskins on their weapons. Some of them are really, really cool. But they're all effectively the same weapon. It's, you have 3 options in the way of guns, and you have a cutlass. And they all do the same for everybody in the game. But they might be pretty. Or they might be hideous.
I think that kind of goes the other way from a game like Monster Hunter, for example, where all the weapons are so distinct from each other.
Yes.
I can't remember exactly how many. I think it's 16 different styles in World. And within that, the something like that. And then within that, the sheer amount of weapons that you've got from killing your previous enemies. And I wonder how that makes us feel when we play these games. Do you get attached to a weapon on the way through? To the point that if you have a visible upgrade from it, just one where it's clearly an upgrade, it's better in every stat, where sometimes you find it really hard to put down the old one and you don't want to move on.
I think, yeah, I don't know if I do in Monster Hunter, but I think there are definitely games where I've played where, like, I'll get an objectively better weapon and be like, yeah, but it looks stupid.
Yes.
Like, I want to stick with my old, weak, very cool looking weapon.
Yeah. In Baldur's Gate 3, I got the Morning Star, and I had to work to get that. And I did it in a lot of different ways, but not the Morning Star,
Blood of Lathander.
Blood of Lathander. Yeah, it is a Morning Star, is what it is. Yeah. But I mean, the Blood of Lathander, yeah. And so when I got it, it was great, and I used it for a very long time. But yeah, you do find better things. But I was like, but it's kind of glowy and it looks neat, and I worked hard to get it, and yeah, it was attachment there.
I think that's another thing with weapons that, like, developers need to keep in mind. Like, if you hype up a weapon in game, if it's supposed to be legendary, and then I find something that's better, you've probably let me down there. Yeah. Unless this other thing that is better is either a huge secret that could not have been hyped up, or is hyped up even more.
But that's a common theme, isn't it, that you find with video games, is that disparity between the way that things are described and the way that things actually are. Almost everything you find, they oversell from the very beginning about how this next foe is the most epic foe you've ever met, and then it turns out it's a big rat. That the next weapon is the best weapon you've ever found, that it's a sword of +1. That kind of idea. And I think it is somewhere where games suffers from for me, is it puts me off actually going and bothering searching for other things, because I just get the idea that the game can't communicate to me efficiently what I'm getting myself into when I start going off on quests. So if I'm playing a game now and you've told me a weapon is amazing, I have to go and find it, and then I find it and then you let me down, the next time you do this, I am less inclined to care. If you do it again the third time, I'm less inclined to care. But if you keep those I've forgotten the word, expectations realistic. I'm not saying tell me this weapon's crap. I'm just saying don't use that really flowery language except for the real good shit. If you do that, you put me off my investment in your stories later in the game.
And I won't spoil anything for you, Com, but in Baldur's Gate 2, there is a workaround to that in the DLC. They did something very unique in that game that made those things that you liked have an ability to live on beyond. Because everything you're facing is harder, of course, in the DLC. But they did a workaround to that, and it's pretty ingenious. I'm surprised that more games didn't implement what they did to just basically give more life or a second life to those things that you used maybe in the first game. So,
well, that's what I was wondering. Do you feel that games should encourage us to move on from weapons and leave them behind? Or do you feel that we should be able to upgrade our weapons and have them come with us all the way through the game?
So
I'm thinking of...
Go ahead.
I was thinking along the lines of armor at the same time.
Yeah.
Whereas sometimes you find a really cool looking suit of armor and you just wish you could keep it, but it steadily becomes out of date. It's no longer fit for purpose. But if only you could upgrade it, if only you could match its stats to the newest thing that you picked up. Do you feel that games should almost enforce us to do that? That they should make us move on, make us try new weapons, make us dispose of things that are no longer useful, or give us a chance to keep bringing them along, to raise its level, to raise its power, and drag it with us the whole way through?
Yeah, I don't know if it meets that description necessarily, but I know in Wukong, it's all about that staff. It's all about that staff and different variations of that staff. You do have the option if you do certain side bosses and a bunch of other stuff to get a spear, but it's not nearly as good as your staffs. So it's kind of interesting. But yeah, that staff can be, you can, instead of upgrading this one type of staff where you are this type of player, you can upgrade to this type of staff. So you're kind of in that vein of, you're not really being forced to progress, but you do need to progress to kind of give you that extra stat boost. But if you went along this way, it kind of like bifurcates as far as like what game style do you want to do? And so I think by moving the needle, by forcing you to change, it's actually still helping you kind of like, hey, here's some more options. And so I think they did that very uniquely. And I really like how they thought about that, because it's still just a staff. It's staff centric.
I think it varies from game to game. So like in Final Fantasy VII, I kind of liked that I'd get to a new area, I'd find a new weapon, I'd throw that on, and it was like visually very different. And I kind of had to keep finding better weapons to keep progressing. And that meant I was kind of forced to experience the gameplay with a new weapon, at least for a tight window. Whereas in like Monster Hunter, I love the fact that you can apply a cosmetic for a weapon you've already unlocked. So like maybe I want to use the new longsword that inflicts poison as it hits, but I don't like the way it looks. So I'll put on my, fire longsword instead, because it's just a cooler look. And then I can do that with the armor pieces as well. There might be like a passive regen associated with a helmet, but I think that helmet looks stupid. So I'll put that helmet on and then I'll apply a cosmetic that makes it look like something else I much prefer. I love that in Monster Hunter, but I feel like if you were to do that in like Dark Souls, you'd lose a lot. I think like the whole point in Dark Souls is that you can't really play Fashion Souls if you want to take the challenge out.
Yeah.
Like if you're focusing on fashion, the game gets harder. I kind of like that for Dark Souls. I feel like that's theme appropriate.
It reminded me when you were saying about putting the skins on. I think one of the first times that I remember that being a thing, it may well have existed before, but I think it might have been in one of the Dragon Age games where you could toggle the hat on or off. And I remember thinking all the hats look awful. They are the worst things I've ever seen in my life. And you could toggle them on and off. And that little quality of life thing really did turn me on to that idea. I just think there's certain places where it doesn't work, and this can be for multiple reasons. Like you said, Dark Souls, it just feels thematically wrong to let you put a skin on something and have the weapon play out differently maybe than it normally would. So you want to use the Zweihänder, but you want it to look like the Moonlight Greatsword. I kind of like that you can't do that because it just feels wrong. Then there's multiplayer. If you have anything with PvP, of course, then your weapon needs to look like what it is, so that you can't just be sort of tricking your opponents as the game goes on. Well, the Zweihänder plays very differently to the Moonlight Greatsword. So having it look like one, not the other, might be actually very problematic in a PvP setting. The other thing I was just going to go for, though, is I also like it when a game doesn't let me apply skins for the reason that I think you were really getting onto, which is the designers have come up with a whole bunch of different stuff. Let me see what they did. Why not? Let me see them have fun. I remember that sword from Final Fantasy VII that looked kind of bluish. It looked like it had teeth sort of going up the side. It was really sharp and serrated. That's a ridiculous looking weapon.
Apocalypse?
Might be. Oh, I can't remember. I can't remember the name.
Apocalypse.
But it was just very, very sharp looking and very gross. And I love that. And I would never have looked if I could have kept the Buster Sword, because I would have just maintained that the whole way through the game.
Yeah.
So it almost feels as though we can potentially do a disservice to the artists and the designers of a game if we just give you that possibility to put on your favorite skin immediately, rather than seeing what they did and letting us have the chance to use those. So maybe we could make it so you have to earn the skin, but I also hate that idea.
I think it kind of comes down to the amount of time you'll spend using that weapon. So like in Final Fantasy, you have a window where you'll use that weapon, and then it kind of feels like it's like, all right, it's time to move on. Let's give you a new weapon. Whereas in Monster Hunter, you might be using that same weapon for hundreds of hours because you're comfortable with it, because it's effective, because you're grinding out the same resources.
Yes.
Having the ability to add variety into that grind makes the game more playable, because you're going to say like, yeah, I'm going to be doing the same thing. I'm going to be fighting the same monster over and over and over again to get the resources that I need for this next upgrade or whatever I'm looking for. But I can make my character look a little different and still not sacrifice my familiarity with this particular weapon set. I could just make it, fun or pretty or silly looking and still have fun with it while I'm still pursuing this grind. And I think that's why it works in Monster Hunter. But if that were the case in Final Fantasy VII, I'd just pick the one thing that I wanted at the beginning and then play through the entire game that way.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm a big, huge proponent of transmog. I love transmog in games. And the thing is that it's just an immersion thing. Cum is the polar opposite of this, and I can prove it because of the Cyberpunk. He would find better gear, but he loved his hot pants, and he would wear those. Like the more mismatched, the better for Cum. So I kept the receipts, but I love the transmog where just give me that little bit. And granted, it's a first person view. I'm never going to see it unless I go to the menu, but give me that little bit of satisfaction that how I look in this world. I love transmog, but the one thing that they don't really transmog hardly ever in games is your weapon. Usually your weapon is going to be what it looks like. So that's pretty neat. Now some of these games you can customize the look of it, maybe the color of it, maybe like you said, the skins of it. But overall, it's still the same weapon. It just, you're not going to make a pistol look like a shotgun type of thing. But
yeah,
but I do love the transmog system. I love being able to and you don't have to do it, of course, but I love the option of saying this is what I look like in game. But almost every system I know of, I can't think of one. Star Wars, the Old Republic does that. You can actually have a weapon that's not that it's a rifle and it becomes a lightsaber, but the lightsaber you're holding isn't the one that you actually have your look as. That is different. But I thought of at least one game, but there's not very many of them out there that will actually let you transmog a weapon.
I think that's one of the things that made Diablo 4 fun for me, is that everything in that game is about getting better gear. But if you start mismatching gear sets, your character looks ridiculous. And some people really love how ridiculous they can make a character look by mismatching things. I'm not one of those people. I want my character to look cool the entire time. So if I find a brand new piece of armor that doesn't fit with the set I'm currently wearing, I'm gonna be like, I might not wear that, even though it's objectively better. But with a transmog, I could be like, yeah, let's put that on, and then immediately change the way it looks.
There's so many weapons we could talk about on this side of the fence. But is there any weapon that you thought this really doesn't belong in this game? I mean, maybe you may not remember it because you obviously clearly wouldn't have used it in those games. But is there anything that kind of fit that bill for you?
Not quite. There was a weapon system that I really didn't enjoy. I've heard arguments for it, but it never swayed me. And it's the weapon degradation in Breath of the Wild, in the Zelda game. So when you pick up a sword, I don't even know how many hits you get. 15 hits, 30 hits, whatever it might be. But after X amount of hits, your weapon breaks and you have to move on and try something else. which I get. I get that they want us to try different things. I get us they want us to be resourceful and always scavenging what we can find and not get attached to something. But I found myself just becoming massively frustrated with it, to the point that it impinged upon my ability to enjoy any of the weapons in the game. Mm-hmm. Even the Master Sword, which I was so thrilled to finally get, because it was my first Zelda game. So to finally get the Master Sword that I've heard about, which is another iconic weapon, I was so thrilled. But then the time came, and it suffered from the same breakage mechanic as all the other weapons. Except you could repair it, and I think it lasted maybe a little bit longer. But their choice of mechanic turned me off every single weapon in their game, which is something I also had with Borderlands and Borderlands 2. The sheer amount of weaponry in that game, even though some of it was very cool, meant that at no point did I gain any kind of emotional attachment to it. And I know it's a false dichotomy to say, do you want a game with one amazing weapon or 1,000 shit ones? Because you could just as easily say, do you want a game with one terrible weapon or 10 really good ones? But the sheer choice in that game really put me off.
It's interesting because I thought we were going to end up talking about Legend of Zelda in this conversation because the Master Sword is iconic. I didn't think that's how we were going to get to the Legend of Zelda is weapon degradation. And overwhelmingly, I hate weapon degradation just because it is realistic, but it's not why I play video games.
Yeah.
Like, that's not where I need the realism. I don't know that I've ever played a game that felt like it was improved by weapon degradation. There's no immersion that's improved by it. There's no gameplay elements that I find more enjoyable. It's very much a kind of like developer control thing to say, like, we needed a mechanic to get you to use something else, or we needed a reason for you to stop and rest so that you could repair your weapons or something along those lines. And that feels weak to me.
Yeah.
When that's like the real reason it's in the game. I just hate it. And it's not me critiquing game design from an objective sense. It's very subjective. It's very much that I just don't like it. I don't have great reasons for it. I just hate it. But it kind of sucks. And I feel like everybody should agree with me.
I think this is where we play video games, and generally we're playing video games for fun. I think there are some exceptions, weirdly enough. Papers, Please, I didn't play for fun, per se. This War of Mine, I didn't play for fun. But on the whole, we play to enjoy and have a good time. And I think developers occasionally, they lean a bit too much into the stick side of that carrot and stick argument. If you want me to use a new weapon, I think you need to persuade me to move on to that new one and not dissuade me from using the old one. I don't need you forcing me to use it. I need you encouraging me to use it, wanting me to use it, and giving me reasons to want to go and use it. And as soon as you tell me I can't use my old one, as soon as you physically push me away from it, you've turned me off a little bit. It's someone forcing you to eat a meal that you don't want, as opposed to going and getting a meal that you do want. Yeah, at the end of the day, you've eaten, but your psychology is very different. The closest, by the way, that I could come to a game where I enjoyed the degradation was Baldur's Gate 1. And even then, it's not enjoying the degradation per se. It's enjoying that world building based around it and the way it motivates the story somewhat. But it's still, as a mechanic, when it actually happens, it's still just frustrating.
Yeah, and it wasn't so much that it degraded, it just broke. It was either...
Right, yeah.
And there's a story reason for it, so yeah. As I said, as I asked the question, I was like, there's not going to be many games that we have reference to because we're probably not using them like at all. But Diablo 3, Diablo 4 has rogues and the demon hunter that use these lightning fast projectiles. And it has always frustrated me because it's fun, but it's not even close to reality. They're like living machine guns. I'm like, there should be no machine guns in Diablo, but but they just shoot off those bolts so fast. I just don't think that that's the appropriate. My mind has never given it the credit as being a viable build because it just doesn't make sense. It makes no sense in the world. But is it fun? Yeah. But the barbarian at least can swing his sword. He can do whirlwind, a bunch of other things. It kind of makes sense in that world. You're doing a lot of damage in a limited area. But, you have to have something if you're going to be a ranged attack. But before, you had like the Amazon that threw the javelin, but it was very slow, but it did a lot of damage. But it took a lot of technique and going back and forth. It's just that they kind of skipped that in Diablo 3 and 4 where you're just... So I just don't think that those worked from an immersion standpoint.
Yeah, I can't think of too many where like the immersion is what led me away from a weapon. That would definitely be one for me where it's just like, I'm playing like this medieval fantasy. I don't need a gun. And maybe that's it. Final Fantasy Tactics. I didn't like that there were guns in that. And they're cool. I wanted them separate because they're still in like they fit into the world. They're still in the sense that like it's a very, very rudimentary design for a gun, and it gets interesting when you add the magic from the fantasy world into it, and that's how they kind of make the guns fit everything. But like there's something, and maybe it's like that almost purist mentality to say like, this is medieval fantasy, I need bows, crossbows, and that's it. If you want to do other ranged stuff, you're just throwing melee weapons. Like, that's no guns. And maybe that's just not a fair criticism, but like, it did take me out of it a little bit.
It's interesting that it probably didn't go the other way. In Final Fantasy VII, there are occasional moments when I think, why doesn't Cloud just use a gun? This would be a lot easier. It's interesting that it doesn't fall that way, because I'm entirely on board with you as well. If I have my medieval fantasy, I don't want anything that resembles a gun. I don't want anything brought backwards in time. But oddly enough, when we're into that more dirty sci-fi future, I'm okay with the sword still being in there.
Yeah.
It's odd that it only goes in that one direction.
Yeah, there's a ton of that in Final Fantasy VII where like Barrett should just shoot everybody. Like, yes. Before it becomes a problem. And it's not like he doesn't have a gun on him. He has a gun on him. Like, he's always prepared. And there's definitely those moments where like you're so immersed in what's going on that you don't care how illogical it is, that Barrett is just letting his arms hang by his side. He's not reacting. You're okay with it because you just want to see how it plays out. But like, I feel like, yeah, when you bring that advantage of, futuristic weapons backwards, that's where the immersion disappears. And you're like, yeah, but now,
yeah,
just shoot it. That's not satisfying.
That's kind of it. It's very difficult to even quantify directly. It just doesn't feel right. It's unpleasant.
Yeah, the games like Flintlock and Bloodborne, they're not medieval games necessarily, but the guns are still overpowered if they were just regular guns, and that's why it's more of a parry system in those, and it's more of like a, let me stun you for a second so I can actually get the actual attack off. So, and it's not like you can just like rapidly fire them either. So, yeah, I think it works in those contexts, but yeah, it's theme appropriate.
I think having an explanation of your in-game world that makes guns less viable also really helps when you're doing this kind of fantasy weaponry stuff. If there was an explanation, if, guns existed in Elden Ring, and there was an explanation, then it's like you're dealing with just legendary creatures that will, regenerate at about the same rate that you pump bullets into them. That explains why you're doing this with like weapons that are almost designed for this purpose.
Yeah.
And that's kind of, it's in Code Vein as well, because one of the weapons you can get is the bayonet on a rifle. And you can fire the rifle, but doesn't do much. It's more of just like an extra ranged jab that like might stagger an enemy, might do a little bit of damage if they're, just hovering at low health. But like, you're very melee focused. There are no ranged builds in Code Vein that don't require spell casting or like abilities. And I prefer that. I don't want a ranged build. I also think mechanically a ranged build doesn't make sense in that game. Like, the game mechanics are built for melee combat. It's really tough for me to imagine that with, a character running around with a bow. It doesn't suit the game.
You also see that in Souls where you can use bows. It very rarely feels good. It's normally incredibly janky feeling, very unpleasant. And I don't think anyone playing those games, unless they're doing a challenge run, is using the bows. And if you say to someone, what's your favorite weapon from the game? 0 people from 100 are saying the bow.
I will say in Dark Souls 1, I used the bows a lot for strategy. I didn't use them in boss combat, but for navigating the world, dealing with enemies that are hiding behind corners or something like that, or enemies that I know will be a problem in melee combat, I'll soften them up with a few arrows and then draw my melee weapon. But like, at no point did I do, Sniff's bold bow only run, because I'm not a masochist.
Yeah.
Like Sniff.
This is a call out.
Yeah.
Ghost of Tsushima does a really good job with archery, because of course you have the different types of bows that do different types of damage. Like they work on, I think, like heavy armor primarily as a attribute of it or something like that. But you also have to kind of level up your skills with it, and you're just not instantly good with it either. So, and there's a limited amount of materials you can find with it. You can't just you have a bow and infinite amount of arrows with it. It definitely is immersive if you play Ghost of Tsushima. It integrates it into its fighting mechanics very well. What about magic? Any favorite magic weapons that you like?
Not weapons per se, but Mass Effect space magic. I love it so much.
Mm-hmm.
Just that is the thing I think kept me in Mass Effect more than almost even the lore, more than the characters, was how fun the combat actually is, and the real joy in that combat, which is why now when I replay Mass Effect, I don't normally play with Shepard as a soldier. I almost always want to give Shepard some form of biotic power, because that space magic feels incredible. And I still, thinking back to playing Mass Effect 3, some of my favorite moments are just on Mars, running through those corridors using the singularity on the Cerberus soldiers. Just the sheer joy of doing that and the combining of the powers. So for me, magic, I love Mass Effect. Nothing has felt quite like how good that felt.
Well, do you play, or do you have a preference for more biotic, like Vanguard and Adept, or are you okay with Sentinel?
Which one is Sentinel?
Well, that's like the half tech, half biotic, but more tech based. Yeah.
No, I'd lean more for either fully biotic or half biotic, half soldier.
Right, because the Vanguard
Sentinels
in 3
are very weak to nuclear detonation.
Yeah.
Just throw that out there.
Yeah. Vanguard in 3, I've said it before, if Vanguard in 3 was in 1 and 2, I'd play a Vanguard a ton. You can have a build where basically every time you kill something, it resets your biotic ability to do the Nova. So you can do that slam, that Nova, and just rinse and repeat. So when you see an enemy, you're happy to see them, because now you're able to kind of like spam that ability and just come at them over and over and over. And I think, because I don't play Vanguard a ton, but I think you can actually couple that with the ability to heal at the same time too. So you have infinite powers and infinite health. But you kind of have to get into that. So if it's a bunch of brutes, you can't do that. I mean, it'll stagger them, but it won't kill them, obviously. But it works with like a bunch of like foot soldiers and things. So that's a great build. But if that was in 1 and 2, I'd definitely be playing Vanguard a lot more.
As far as like what I think of like iconic kind of magic, I think the summons in Final Fantasy, and specifically the way that they operate in like Final Fantasy 7, Final Fantasy 9. The idea that these are like, magical little buddies who show up, they do their thing, and then they disappear. In 10, the idea that they're like, they engage in turn-based combat after you summon them. It worked in 10. It was a lot of fun. And I think it was a great gameplay element, but like that's not my preferred version of them. And I think of just like those moments in Final Fantasy 7 where you get to use Knights of the Round and it feels so incredibly satisfying. In Final Fantasy 9 where you get Bahamut and you're like, this is awesome. And then, in Final Fantasy 8, they suck.
Yeah. Do you have...
awful.
Because I think I actually agree with you, and I kind of wish I'd said it now. Do you have, from 7, a favorite summon animation?
Hades.
Oh, it's very good. Hades, I wouldn't have thought of that. That's a great choice.
Hades is my favorite. And it's not the most powerful. It's not the most... Well, I mean, it is kind of like useful. The most strategic.
Yeah.
But it's not like this game-breaking element like Knights of the Round is. But it's so cool. I just like it. I don't have an explanation. It's just a great animation.
I think, honestly, my favorites, and it's a very basic answer, is Bahamut Zero. And it's the same thing. It just looks incredible. It's such a fun animation. And that was one of the beauties of that game and that magic was just the ability for the developers to take 30 seconds and just have fun. And just paint a dragon flying out of the sky, paint Hades coming out of the underworld. And it won't get the credit it deserves generally, I think, as a game. But the summons in Final Fantasy 15 are exceptional.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's a positive and a negative for me. Because I love when the summons show up in 15. But they're not a regular part of combat. There's like specific circumstances that need to be fulfilled in order for you to summon them. And like, that's not why I play Final Fantasy games. The fact that is a 30-second cutscene that I think is super cool, that is on demand in Final Fantasy 7 is awesome. The fact that I might see it once in a playthrough of Final Fantasy 15, that's infuriating.
I love the Ramuh cutscene. From 15. It is the coolest thing I think I've ever seen in a video game.
I still remember the first time that happened for me.
Me too, and it was the only time.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It was the only time I saw it. And I was doing that stupid little cup noodle side quest. And I had to fight a giant shrimp. And then I summoned the god of lightning. It was just like the most absurd explanation for what is going on, to say that like, this is a side quest focused around improving my ramen. And I literally summoned a deity to fry shrimp.
And not only that,
absurd.
Not only that, but this was the only time in your quest that you deemed it appropriate. Literally
the only divine intervention that has occurred is in my quest for shrimp ramen. That's so ridiculous.
Go play Final Fantasy 15, everyone. It's better than you've heard.
I'm a big fan of that game, and the criticism against it I get.
They're fair.
I don't genuinely disagree with, but it is a great game overall, in my opinion.
Yeah,
it's just there are like the things that are frustrating are very easy to fixate on.
Yes.
Well, as far as like magical abilities, Star Wars: The Old Republic and KOTOR 2 have the Force Choke. I love that. Yeah, it does DPS and it's a CC, so that's why. The other what I was thinking about as far as an actual weapon, this goes back to my WoW days, and I think anybody who's played WoW will know what I'm saying. There is a weapon that you can get as a priest if you play Holy Priest or Shadow Priest. That is just light years beyond anything else you'll get for a while. I mean, probably until the DLCs. But it's called Benediction. Had to think about it. And then you can actually turn it into a DPS weapon, which in Benediction, it's for healing and things like that. It boosts your stats amazingly. But if you're a DPS type priest, you can actually convert it to what's called an anathema, and it does those same things, but in a DPS form where you're attacking. And you do it from the raids like Molten Core and things like that. But the way you get it is that not only do you have to find the parts for it, but you have to do like this really hard quest because you're a holy priest. You're not good at fighting. You're very squishy, but you have this trial that you have to do that involves fighting a lot of enemies. I mean, if you get anybody to help you with that, it automatically resets it. And you have to wait another 15 minutes or whatever for the person to spawn again. So you can't have any assistance with it. So when you get it, you feel like you've really truly earned it because not only did you do the level progression, but you also did the raids for it, but you also did the personal trial for it. And when you get it, it does give you those stat bonuses. So as a magical weapon, very iconic. Anybody who's played the original WoW don't know what I'm talking about. But yeah, that's probably my magical weapon, iconic, and that was perfect for that purpose. But
I think that's something that I kind of universally really like in games is those unique weapons associated with your chosen character. So like in BG3, you can get the Devotee's Mace if you progress a cleric exclusively as a cleric all the way up. I think they have to get to like level 11 before they can cast the spell that lets you get it. But like, I really like that idea of a unique weapon associated with a decision that you made a long time ago. To say that like in character creation, I chose this class. And now that opens up this door to a unique quest line that gives me this specific weapon that's not available if I were to choose something else. I really like that. And I don't have like an iconic one in mind. I just like the idea of that tying back to your character creation that almost makes it feel personalized, even though it is built into the game as like a simple if then command. But you know, it feels like it's for you because you made that choice.
so I have one that's magical, ranged, and melee, and very iconic. The Blades of Chaos, Kratos.
Yeah.
You can get people
A
from
lot of the
afar.
weapons in
Yeah.
God of War are really cool.
Yeah, but I mean, the Blades of Chaos. I mean, yes, you know, you have the axe in the more recent versions of God of War, which is great. A lot of people I see who are new to the series love the axe. They prefer the axe. I love my blades. As soon as I have a chance to get my blades again, that's mainly what I go to. Now, granted, there are moments where definitely the axe is your only weapon and also fits the combat what you need to do. But we're talking about old God of War and many portions of the newer ones, the Blades of Chaos. Man, I can't say enough about that. Love those weapons. Love the blades.
I feel like God of War is one of those unique games in the sense that like there's an iconic main character, but not an iconic weapon that you associate with that character. Because like the early games, it was very much about finding new weapons, and you didn't necessarily abandon the old ones. It's just you kind of blended them all together, and that was a really cool aspect of those games. But like, it meant that Kratos didn't have like a defining weapon, which in a way is better in my mind. Like the idea that Kratos it suits him to say he's using everything at his disposal because he's waging war on Olympus in the early games. Like, he's not going to fixate on something and forego an advantage that might exist somewhere else. It made sense in world, but I also do love those iconic weapons. To say like the Buster Sword is the definitive weapon for Cloud, even though that's not the weapon he uses for the majority of the game.
Boy, hand me my chains.
Yeah, maybe that's his definitive weapon, his child.
Do you have one, Com? Kind of like ties all of them together. It's not an easy one to kind of like grasp at the gaming ether for.
I can tell you a weapon that I've just thought of, which is incredibly strange, and I'm glad it exists because it doesn't really need to. And it's from the Elder Scrolls, and it's the Wabberjack from Elder Scrolls for Oblivion Shivering Isles expansion. I can't remember exactly what it does, but I know it's very strange. I think what the Wabberjack does is, when you hit an enemy with it, they turn into a random creature. It's got maybe 10 or 20 creatures available, equal chance of turning into all of them. They could turn into a common goblin, they could turn into a sheep, they could turn into some gigantic ogre. But whenever you hit them, they will turn into one of these things for 30 seconds. And it's stupid, because you don't need that. You don't need that at all. You can probably kill every enemy in the game by the point that you found this anyway. But the temptation to hit someone and try and turn them into a sheep. That is so stupid that I love it.
It's like wild magic on that staff.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think there are probably plenty more examples of those kinds of weapons to say that, like, it's not even necessarily iconic. It's definitely not the best weapon in the game. It's more kind of a gimmick, but like, I'm very glad it was there. One of them that pops into mind is Bane from Borderlands 2. It is a gun that makes the most unpleasant noises when you fire it. It's essentially just somebody screaming, and that's what the bullet sound is. And I hate it. I never used that gun, but oh my god, is that a hilarious payoff for that quest line? Because it is one of those weapons that's hyped up to absurdity in game. To say that, like, this was a legendary weapon that people sacrificed their lives in search of, and then you get it and you're like, I hate this thing. It's such a satisfying, like, kind of turning that quest line on its head at the end. And I love that it's in there, despite the fact that I will never use that gun.
I can give you another one on that. It's from Cyberpunk, and it's Skippy, the AI gun.
Yeah, I don't like Skippy.
No one likes Skippy. It's terrible.
Oh, I love Skippy. I actually don't like to finish the quest because I have to turn him in at that point. I love him. I would not be shocked if he got actually inspiration. CD Projekt Red got inspiration from Baldur's Gate 2 on that. And I won't say more than that, but there's something similar there.
I was actually going to mention that as the other example, but if we're staying away from it.
Yeah.
Just say the name for everyone. Just say the name.
I actually don't remember the name of the sword.
Oh.
We can cut that bit.
Just say the name. Banana? Come on.
The issue is it's like a proper noun that's not like another word.
Okay. Oh, like the Boogaladoof or something.
The Liarcore. Liarcore.
Lilacore,
yeah.
Yeah, that's it.
Don't worry, I'll forget that very quickly.
And that's the thing. Like, we could have just said that, and it wouldn't have provided any more context. But the reason we didn't say it is because we couldn't fucking remember.
Oh, let's start that over. Com says, just say the name. Lilacore. Obviously, come on.
Fuck. I've already forgotten.
There's going to be the harshest cut in between those two things.
Yeah, no problem.
I just love the idea of, like, we do a second take, which we never do. And Com's just like, yeah, just say the name. And I'm like, no.
You know what really happened.
Yeah.
I think what's really great about Skippy, though, is that the lore isn't just finding the talking weapon. It's actually pretty interesting who it belongs to, how it got to be that person. It's like, if you want to go down that rabbit hole, it's there. They could have just added a talking gun and then, oh, this is neat, this is just different or whatever. But there's actually a whole backstory with that gun too, and that I found that part kind of interesting.
Yeah, I didn't do that.
You can also set it to not be death kills so automatically. So if you're doing a let's say you're using them for like the cyber psychos and you don't want to do a death kill, you could actually use Skippy for that purpose. So
I am not surprised that they chose to make a brand new weapon talk as opposed to like that dildo weapon we were talking about earlier, because I do not want to hear what that weapon has to say.
What would the talking dildo be called? What would its name be?
If we had to name it, you mean?
Yeah. I've got Wobbler in my head, which is very unpleasant.
The Wobbler.
No, not the.
Yeah,
not the.
Just
Wobbler.
Yeah. The Wriggler. Yeah.
Oh, that's not nice either.
Mr. Wiggles.
Oh, that's better. That's better. I think any word that begins with "you" just sounds really horrible.
I'm just imagining it like, because I still don't remember this weapon in Cyberpunk, but I remember the one in Saints Row. And like, given that the talking gun in Cyberpunk is named Skippy, I'm just thinking of calling this one Floppy. That's the name I'm going with.
Wait till Legion starts telling us about the lore.
But yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. Like, I don't want to have a conversation with that weapon.
There's only one way to get that particular weapon, and it's through just meeting up with Meredith Stout.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was
And Com is over there like, I didn't know. I thought we were just going to just say, hey, howdy, how you doing?
I thought there were going to be more missions.
No tell motel.
I love that, like that's supposed to be kind of the definitive thing for like my condition, is that like I don't read subtext, I don't read like nonverbal communication, and yet Com is the one who didn't know what was going on in there, and I knew full well why I was showing up to the no-tell motel
after hours alone.
She can't meet you in public, can she? She can't meet you in a regular bar or anything. She's in danger. We had to meet somewhere incognito.
Yeah.
With a dildo.
Just like that statement, like she can't meet you in public, is true for like 90% of the people you talk to in that game.
But that's why
only one of them do you go to this motel.
But it just seemed like a good place to meet.
Good code name.
The only one
No-tell
who
motel.
placed any importance on there being a bed in the room where you meet.
Like in like 2 hours time, I'm gonna suddenly remember something someone said to me when I was 14 and just think, oh, they were into me.
Yeah.
Yeah, not good at reading those signs. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, friend zone forever. Well, you were never really in the friend zone, but you know, that's just how you interpreted it. So,
is there a Welsh phrase for no-tell motel? I feel like there's probably not.
It's probably a German one.
Yeah, that I would believe. Germans have a word for everything.
Specifically this. Can we? Fucking hell.
Can we get back on topic?
No, I was gonna say, sort of like rounding off, 'cause I think we're getting quite deep into the podcast now. Is there anything that you just think hasn't been referenced, like some kind of really iconic weapon that you think just somehow didn't come up?
well, I wouldn't. Okay, so I was thinking about it, but Baldur's Gate 3, you can use almost anything as a weapon. It may not do much damage, but you can pick up like a bowl, throw it, and it does something. But you can actually create a build. I think it's called the Pub Fighter Tavern Brawler. You combine that with like a melee type build, and I think if you have the spear from the first chapter, where you combine the spear that you can throw, you can basically make that spear almost like a legendary weapon by the time you're done with that build. But it by itself, it's just a base level weapon, and the skills behind it are not all that incredible, but it's because everything's kind of piling on top, because it comes back to you, is what I'm saying. So you're able to throw it like a javelin, use it for those extra bonus points of like almost like a because it's doing physical damage, but then it comes back to your possession. So you have a guy who is normally a melee fighter, and you can use it for melee purposes, but you can also toss it and it does just as much damage. So you have both a ranged and a melee, and it's a really interesting build. So it's not really iconic, I would say, but it is something that's unique in that game. You wouldn't be able to do that in most games, because most games you have a limited definition of what a weapon is. BG3 kind of throws that out the window.
There's one I was thinking of, and it's definitely not an iconic weapon, because when I think of like the iconic weapon from this series, it's something else entirely. But it's Mario's hammer.
Oh,
I don't know if anybody remembers where that was introduced or like how we got it, but like it was just something we all kind of accepted. I think it's introduced in Super Mario RPG.
That was Donkey Kong.
Well, yeah, I mean, that was, yeah. But again, that wasn't translated to Mario games.
Because you got to remember, Mario was a carpenter
game
first. Then he became a plumber.
That makes way more sense.
Mm-hmm. Law.
But it was definitely one of those things, like, we came back to it, and I think it was first seen in Mario RPG, like, within the Mario titled games. Because I'm trying to think, prior to that, you had Hammer Bros, but Mario didn't take their hammer from them. And then it was a huge part of Paper Mario, and it was just something that I accepted and I didn't think about when I was playing those games. But like, when I think of iconic Mario weapons, it's the Fire Flower. Like, that's the definitive Mario weapon. But like, really, it's his hammer. Like, that was the original counter to Donkey Kong that became Smash Brothers canon. And then in the Paper Mario games, it was like, that's your alternative to jumping, which is kind of his whole thing. They needed something to counterbalance that. But like, I just remember being an adult and somebody asked me about the hammer, and that's when it finally clicked that I was just like, I've never thought about it. It was just something that they were like, Mario has a hammer. Okay, moving on. That was a strange realization. Because you would think a plumber would have like a wrench.
Yeah.
No.
I thought actually when you were going to Mario, I was really surprised that the weapon wasn't the Fire Flower.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The definitive weapon is the Fire Flower. But like, Mario's weapon is the hammer. Like,
What?
Most of us forget that he has.
Yeah. I'm gonna go slightly darker with my choice. It's nothing terrible, but slightly darker. And I think it's a weapon that's become just iconic in gaming as a whole and would probably have surpassed gaming just on its iconic level. And it's Hitman Agent 47's Fiber Wire. Which I think he's one of those characters who actually has transcended gaming. You could see him outside of gaming. People might know that image. And I couldn't decide whether it's his silence pistols or whether it's his fiber wire, but there's something very, very Hitman-y, and I mean that in the sense of the game and also the idea of who these people are in the collective imagination of the fiber wire, how up close and personal that is. And this is one where all through the talk I was thinking of a place where I could maybe talk about it, but it just never came up. But I think it's one of those that has genuinely, like the Assassin's Creed weapon, has transcended gaming and now can be found outside of it too.
Laura's pistols in Tomb Raider, because you'll have access to grenades, assault rifles, shotguns, but they all require ammunition to find that stuff. And with Laura's pistols, it's infinite ammo, so it just inevitably, I tend to stick to that, because if you know the gameplay mechanics well enough, you really rarely need those other methods of shooting. Usually the pistols are perfectly adequate, and so they never become overpowered, but they never become underpowered, and so you're always using them. So yeah, Laura's pistols, and plus it's every single art that you'll find with her, it's usually her with her pistols, not something else. So, well, there's the bows now with the newer versions, but she still, once you find those pistols, it's like it's kind of like when the newest God of War, and he like returns to the blades. It's that type of moment. She finds her pistols. Like, well, we're doing pretty good up to this point.
I think the Gears of War, like, is that the Lancer, the like chainsaw?
The chainsaw gun.
Yeah. I think that's like probably the next most obvious to me is the one that kind of pops into my head as far as like a video game weapon. Like it's very video gamey. I think Dead Space probably has a lot of really interesting weapons. I don't know that any of them really become iconic, but like I've been watching people play Dead Space because those games have never been my genre. But there are some really interesting things going on with the weapons in those games.
No, the iconic weapon in that one is that welder, whatever the first weapon you get.
Yes, it's the only weapon I used all through the playthrough.
Yeah, it is.
Because it just felt like the right one to be using.
It always works. Now, there are other weapons that'll be useful for certain situations, but that one is kind of like Laura's pistol. You always come back to it. Yep.
That's where you could add. The other one that came into my mind when we're talking about those kind of weapons was the Kingdom Hearts Keyblade. I'm really not into Kingdom Hearts.
That one.
Yeah. But it's such a video gamey weapon, and no one else has a weapon that looks like that. Yeah, the Kingdom Hearts Keyblade, I think, has
the red versus blue joke about the sword, where they're talking about the sword and it's a key to unlocking something, and then Caboose is sitting there going, maybe it's always a key, and when you put it in someone, it unlocks their death. And like that is the entirety of Kingdom Hearts in my mind. Is like Caboose made a video game, and that's what happened.
Anyone out there who says the lore is complicated, they're overthinking it.
Yeah,
that's it.
I nailed it. It's like one sentence. You're welcome.
You're welcome, internet.
So this one's kind of a obvious answer, but I mean, the lightsaber, but it really depends on the game, of course. But like in KOTOR, when you're able to construct your own, you're able to like piece it together and, use it. It's like a different game at that point. It just is. So I would have to include the lightsaber, but not across all games.
I feel because I would have called that an iconic weapon, not a video game weapon.
Yeah, same.
Yeah, because like I said, in Force Unleashed, you're kind of expected to have them. They're with you. It's just part of the game. But like I said, in KOTOR, it's not like that. You're not I'm not going to give major spoilers. There are some spoilers we gave during this podcast, but you're not a Jedi. You become one. So it has that difference feel to it as well. So we covered quite a bit, and I do think that we could probably cover 3 more hours on this topic, to be honest, if we keep thinking about it.
I just have a list on my screen of just weapon names.
Yeah. I mean, maybe one day we'll do a tier list. That might be fun, or like a draft like we did before with our characters. Like what weapon would we want
I'm just thinking of like the way that this translates into other aspects of a video game. And I love the idea of an ultimate weapon in a video game. So like, I'm a huge Final Fantasy X fan. It's probably like my favorite of the core Final Fantasy games. And the ultimate weapons in those games are not even weapons that I use because you can make better ones. But I love that they each have their own little quest line to get them.
Yeah.
I like that's something that I think I really enjoy in video games, is the idea that like there is this very big deal kind of weapon that you have to devote time specifically to get. It's not like you get it as part of the playthrough. It's not the Master Sword. You're not just on a quest that involves picking this up. It's you went out of your way to get this best weapon available for your character. That really appeals to me. And the idea that there's one for each playable character. That's also pretty cool.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So like I said, we could probably go 3 hours talking about this. And various ways of looking at it. Yeah, absolutely. But we'll go ahead and call it here. I imagine we will circle back to this because, like I said, I started thinking about it. I was like, man, there's just so many different aspects we could look at this one subject about. But yeah, so if you like the video, give it a like. Join the Discord. You can give us your comments there, and always give comments on the videos because they greatly help push the videos to others who may be looking for something wonderfully entertaining like us. But but yes, until then, we will see you guys later. Take care. Thank you. Bye-bye.